This is the second lab. It's on operational space controller to control strategies, and in essence, the idea is very similar to the first lab, to generate a sinusoidal trajectory for the x component of the end effector, then a step reference trajectory for that component, and as an optional thing, you can try to implement yourself at home. I don't think you have time here to the inverse kinematics optimization, numerical inverse kinematics to compare the tracking of the end effector. Otherwise, you can use try to implement a PD controller at the beginning using just defining only a reference for the position of the end effector, not for the orientation. And if you do that, you can see that the behavior is the following. So the end effector position on the x direction sinusoidal trajectory is tracked, but the orientation is changing. It's exactly the behavior you were asking. Mm-hmm. So you kind of have some tracking on the position, but if you plot the joints position, and you can use the same plots that you used in the previous lab. You see that the okay, no, I didn't log the joint variables here. So you need to plot the joints. You need to plot also their variables. I just log the the effector variables. But anyway, you see from the visualization that there was a very weird behavior. How do we do with that? We can add the postural task. That is equation 1 and 2, mapping the torques from the postural task through the null place, and adding to the torque we computed from the main task. And you will see that the robot behaves differently. Then you, as in the previous case, previous lab, you can try to add a gravity compensation term that tries to remove the steady state error, a feed-forward term that tries to improve the tracking, but you still have the inertial coupling there. And then implementing operational space inverse dynamics, you should see that the coupling go away and you're able to achieve a perfect tracking. There is a different way of implementing operational space dynamics, trying to compensate the bias term H only at the joint level rather than at the effector level to cope with the fact that you need a proper estimation. It's harder to get a proper estimation in the effector level. It can be error prone and it can introduce instabilities. Rather, if you do at the joint level, the accuracy doesn't introduce instability and the inaccuracies. Finally, there is the last exercise is an external force, adding an external force, and then you will see that with inverse dynamics you can still have, even if you have a perfect tracking without external force, with an external force you need to have a feedback term that tries to contrast the external disturbance. And then the last exercise is on the implementation of the orientation control. So adding an orientation of the end effector. So this time you no longer need the postural task because your task is 6D. You are controlling both the position of the end effector and the orientation, and your robot is 60 degrees of freedom. So everything is determined. And you can try to compare angle axis with the representation with quaternions, say show that they give the same result, but you will see that the motion is not very nice, and this is due to the fact that you don't have any redundancy, so it's forced to have that orientation, and that in that position you will have a predefined joint motion consistent. If you want a more natural motion, then you need a 7 degrees of freedom robot or more degrees of freedom to achieve a more natural posture. Okay. So to wrap up the results of the lab, the first apart from the sinusoidal reference generation, the first control law is the PD control law in the operational space. In this case, it's a PD control, and since our task is only 3-dimensional and our set of torque is 6-dimensional, we expect some indeterminacy in the motion, because the end effector is able to follow the desired trajectory, but the whole motion of the joints it's completely random. Sorry, there was an external force here. That's why, because there was no postural task. If we have a postural task that tries to keep the robot in a default configuration conf.q0 that we select, and we multiply these torques for the null space of the end effector task, then, and we add it to the torque, then I expect the robot is from one side trying to follow the end effector, but from the other side trying to keep the default configuration. So you will see the joints are no longer moving randomly, but still we have some issues. So our sinusoidal trajectory is on the x direction. We have a strong steady-state offset on the z direction due to the fact that the gravity is not compensated. We have tracking errors during the transient. So what we do, we can try to compensate gravity. This time we do gravity compensation at the end effector. So we have a PD term plus the gravity compensation at the end effector that generates a desired force that then through operational space mapping we map into torques. And this time, if we look at the plots, in the Z component especially, we should be able to see that the state error is gone away. We still have problems during the transient. So we try to add a feed-forward term to see if this transient tracking improves, and we add especially the desired deceleration times the operational space inertia as a feed-forward term to this desired virtual force. And we see that the tracking is improved. We see that the problem at the beginning due to the fact that the velocity is not starting from cosine 1 2 pi f. But it's getting better. We still have some couplings due to the inertial effects that we can get rid of implementing the inverse dynamics at the operational space. So feed-forward term, I have a question for you. In here, we got a PD and we map directly into desired forces. Here, we do something different. These gains that are living here and in this control are the same are in the same space, or they are in different space.
This one has the units as you told earlier.
What?
The latter has the physical meaning.
The latter one, I would say no. These gains are in the acceleration, and these gains are impedances, are stiffness, because they map position into forces. So actually the ones that have physical meanings are here. So whenever you implement inverse dynamics, you need to remember that you need to retune. You cannot use the same, to have the same compliance, you cannot use the same gains that you were using before in just an impedance control way, but you need to tune them differently. Because now you are kind of treating the system as a point mass. So you're removing completely the dynamics of the system. You cannot use the same gains that you used before. I don't do that because I'm lazy, but you can see at least that the behavior should remove the coupling effect that we had before. Actually, the tracking is much better. This is just numerical errors, and the tracking it's almost perfect.
So this one is inverse dynamics, right?
Yeah.
It's inverse only because you got the Jacobian transpose in line 147, or
No.
and the lambda. You got the lambda.
Yeah, we actually we have the direct vector force. We multiply for the lambda, which is the operational space inertia, and we add the bias terms. So we are kind of inverting the operational space dynamics. But still we need the new space term to avoid that crazy motion. So another way to don't do the computation of u, which is very complex, is to just add h instead of u inside of the transpose. We will have the same.
You need f dash.
Yeah?
You need f dash. You command.
I need f dash, yes.
And also,
Yeah? So this is an hybrid case. It gives a slightly different result, but I mean it should be okay. If we implement the orientation task, then what we need to do? There is a bunch of things to do. So we need to first we get the orientation of our end effector, the actor orientation, and okay, this is from the end effector to the word because Pinocchio provides this, and we get the word to the end effector, the rotation matrix. Then we get the angular, the twist, which is this time is the angular and linear and angular velocity, vector 16. We get the omega, which is the angular part of this. Then we get we define some desired orientation. I don't know. We want the x-axis to be as the y-axis. We want the y-axis pointing down, and we want the z-axis pointing back. This is our desired orientation. We mount this orientation matrix. And then we have also the desired angular velocity that we want to be 0. So we want to fix this orientation. And we compute the orientation error from these two rotation matrices, the desired one and the actual one. With the actual one we use the transpose. And then we compute the angle axis representation corresponding to this orientation error in the rotation matrix. And we get the cosine of the delta theta, which is the scalar, the axis, and in essence we apply the formula that we explained in the lecture, and then we multiply the delta theta, the scalar part, times the unit norm axis, and we get the orientation error. Now we need to remember to map the orientation error that is defined in the end effector frame back to the word frame, because we need to add this orientation error times the gain matrix for the angular component, the proportional gain for the angular component, to the derivative part that multiplies the omega that is as well in the word frame. So we put a minus sign because we want to drive the orientation error to 0. We compute the virtual branch, the virtual moment that we stuck together with the virtual force, creating a virtual branch. And this virtual branch, through the Jacobian transpose, we directly map into torques. We don't do any inverse dynamics here, so I am expecting that the gravity still creates some error. And this time we see that the orientation doesn't change. The orientation is always horizontal, whatever you define. The horizontal part is tracking the x trajectory. So this is the position, the orientation. We have not done inverse dynamics, so we have coupling effect, we have no feed forward, so we have tracking errors. The z component is here because it's a tracking error because there is no gravity compensation. And the orientation, you see that after a first transient, because the robot starts in a default, in an initial configuration that is not the desired one, it goes to the roll pitch yaw angle of the orientation frame, and they go to the desired one. Why do we have this very bad behavior? Is because we have a 60 degrees of freedom robot, and this is what you get. The only solution that is one-to-one mapping the desired orientation and position into desired joint. If you want to have a more natural behavior, you need to have a 7 degrees of freedom robot. Okay, if I add an external force, which is the last one, I can see the effect of this force that pulls up the thing. In this case, the force will not affect the orientation tracking, but it will affect the tracking on the position at the set component of the position. Okay. So as I told you, next Monday for some organizational problems, we don't do the lecture. We will cover this at the end on the 23rd. Fill in the doodle if you. I can add a possibility also to do the course, the exam as part the last 1 hour and a half of the last lecture, if you prefer. So I will add this as a possibility in the doodle, depending if you want to do the exam on Friday 23rd or next Monday, or in the morning, in the afternoon of Friday, or in the morning of Friday, or in the afternoon, in the morning of Monday.
24th. Friday is 24th.
Yeah. 24th, sorry. Yeah, not 24th, sorry.
Is the exam going to be coding or?
No, I think I will do open questions that you can write on paper, and some block diagrams, some equations. Unless you really want to code. In that case, you can do also a part of the exam that is related to code. But since there are people, outside, external people that are doing the exam at the same time, it gets a little bit complicated. That's why maybe it's better to do it this. Okay, always remember to pull the latest version of everything, because I'm continuously updating stuff. As you know, this is the first time we do this course, so there's a little bit of tuning